everyone, I'm Jess, and you are watching Discern with Jim Dennison. Today is Friday, November 12th. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jess. Good to be with you today.
Good to be with you. We made it to Friday. Today we're actually going to be starting a 3-part series. And Jim, could you actually walk us through a little bit of what we're going to be talking about these next few days?
Absolutely. I'm excited to get to do this. There are structures that really govern every minute of our lives in some ways, all of which are ordained by God. 3 of the most obvious, 3 of the most significant are family, church, and state. And by state, we mean government or what's sometimes considered to be secular authorities. Well, all of these, as we said, are really relevant in every way of our lives, and they're actually intertwined with each other as well. But wouldn't it be good to know what God thinks about these? Wouldn't it be good to know what God thinks about the family, for instance, about the best way to be a family, the best way to relate to each other in family, how to be families God can bless. The same with church and the same with state.
Well, thanks for that introduction to the series. So as you said, today we're going to be talking about family specifically, and we have an article that goes along well with this. And I think in a previous episode, we talked about the election for governor in Virginia. And so that is still along these same lines, with one specific issue between those candidates centered around parents' involvement in what is being taught in public schools. So this is from the Washington Post. Battles over instruction and curriculum in public schools are not new, and there are legitimate concerns today about whether some school districts are distorting American history in an overreaction to the mistakes of the past. But there are also legitimate concerns about some Republicans stoking a parental rights movement for political gain, furthering cultural divisions. By their telling, a cabal of school administrators and teachers have sidelined parents from critical decisions, including mask wearing, sex education, and the teaching of U.S. history. So, Jim, after reading about this, I just want to know, what roles does God give to the family, and how does education fit into that?
That's a great question, and it's obviously a very relevant question these days especially, isn't it? So the first verse that comes to mind is the biblical command, train up a child in the way that he should go. God's first responsibility for education is to the parents, is to the family. That's our responsibility as parents and family, to care for the upbringing, to care for the education of our children, and to some degree our grandchildren as well. Then on a second level, that's to be holistic. If you go back to Deuteronomy 6, parents are told to teach their children the word of the Lord when they rise up and when they lie down, when they're in public and when they're in private. This is something we're to be doing constantly. If you think about Jesus in Luke 2:52, who grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man after he submitted himself to his parents, even Jesus doing that. So parents, in God's economy, have the first responsibility for the education of their children, not just about spiritual matters, but about every dimension of our lives. Well, just for a lot of American history, that's really how education worked. My grandfather, who was born in 1898, completed all the education available in a small town in Kansas, which was the 8th grade. Because back in those days, what the schools taught, public schools taught, were the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic. But most of what he needed to learn, he learned from his family and from his employers. He was a farmer and then eventually became a carpenter, and most of his life skills weren't taught in school. They were taught by families and taught by community. And then as the generations have gone by, education's obviously become more and more specialized. You want doctors teaching doctors rather than parents teaching kids how to be doctors. So there was just this sense that parents were actively engaged in the education of their children, even if they were outsourcing some of that. Well, a lot of that's what's changing right now with some of the stories that you're describing. There really has grown up in recent years a sense among some that there are some skills, there's some knowledge that needs to be taught to children that parents can't do, that in fact parents may not understand, whether it's critical theory or critical race theory, whether it's something more specific to, let's say, sexual morality or LGBTQ rights, that sort of thing. I myself, to go back to where I started, from a biblical point of view, would encourage parents to be absolutely actively involved in the education of their children. And I think there should be a role for that in all education, whether it's private or it's public.
I wanted to talk specifically more on this line from the Washington Post article that I found really interesting. It says, everyone, parents, teachers, and school administrators, as well as politicians, need to focus less on what books are being taught and more on giving students the skills to think critically and form their own judgments. For me, I think that could look like, leaning into hard questions or not shying away from topics that we might think are heavy or hard. I don't know. When I think think about parenting, I think those are things I want to incorporate in my kids' education. But in your experience as a parent, what have you found to be helpful in being an integral part of your children's education?
And it's the both end. I think we want to teach them how to think as well as what to think. On the what to think, it's the biblical worldview, as you said. It's teaching our children almost from the time they're born as to how to live biblically, how to live a life God can bless. My wife told our boys from the time they were very small how important it is to do that, to live a life God can bless. And so we would quite often ask, well, what does God think about this? What does the Bible say about that? And try to teach our children to begin thinking and living biblically and live in the context of the biblical worldview.
I have really enjoyed this conversation with you about the family, and in our next episode, we're going to be looking at the church. That's all we have for you guys today. We'll see you here next time on Discern.